Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. When I was growing up, I probably had a very different experience than most of y'all. I know a lot of my audience grew up during the Cold War, where the possibility of a massive world-ending conflict was a very real threat. Growing up in the 90s and mid to early 2000s, the Soviet Union had already collapsed by the time I started school, so I never had to do ducking, cover drills, or anything like that. As long as we could get out of the building if it caught on fire or get in fetal position during a tornado, we were considered good to go. Unfortunately, though, we now live in a day and age where a major conflict between major world powers is more likely than it's been in decades. A few weeks ago, I did a video covering how close we could be to World War III, in which current or potential conflicts could set it off. And if we were to experience a third world war, there's a very real possibility that it could go nuclear. So today we're going to talk about things that you can do to give yourself the best chance of surviving a nuclear war, or at the very least, the very beginning of one. The first thing you need to do to survive a nuclear war is not be in a target area when it all starts to go down. While it's hard to list every potential target, there are some places that'll almost certainly be hit, or at the very least be on our enemy's fiery apocalypse wish list. The main goal of a first strike will be to limit an opposing nation's ability to strike back using their own nuclear weapons. Areas that house missile silos, like Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana and Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, will be some of the first hit, along with bases that house strategic bombers. These include Whiteman in Missouri, that houses B-2 Spirit bombers, and Barksdale in Shreveport, that's home to our B-52 Stratofortresses. Naval bases that can support nuclear submarines, like Naval Base Kitsap in Washington State, will be primary targets as well. Then military command and control hubs like Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado and the Pentagon in DC, along with facilities that would likely be used to house folks like the president, would get hit as well. The White House would be an obvious target, but other places like Mount Weather in Virginia and Camp David in Maryland are known to have emergency shelters as well. Then aside from military and government targets, larger cities, especially those that have major ports, refineries, or other facilities that would be vital to supporting a nation during a war, would be targeted along with nuclear power plants. Now, obviously, these aren't the only places that could get hit in a full-on nuclear war. If you want to see a list and map of potential nuclear targets around you, I'd recommend picking up a copy of Strategic Relocation. It breaks those targets down into primary, secondary, and tertiary lists so that you have a better idea of what places would definitely be targeted, along with which ones may get hit but wouldn't be as high of a priority. Now, when a nuke detonates, it releases a massive amount of energy. This is visible very briefly as a fireball, although you shouldn't look at it because it can blind you. After that, a blast wave will obliterate everything in the immediate area that wasn't vaporized by the fireball, and that'll gradually lose power as it travels outward. And if you're far enough away from the explosion to not be killed by either the fireball or blast wave, you'll see the characteristic mushroom cloud fill the sky. But even if you're not in an area directly affected by a nuclear blast, there's still a very good chance that you'll have to deal with radioactive fallout. When a nuclear warhead detonates, debris and soil mix with radionuclides, which will be thrown high into the air. Over time, this fallout will settle wherever the wind blows it, which could end up being hundreds of miles away. When dealing with fallout or any other nuclear or radiological threat, there are three main types of radiation to be concerned about. First, gamma radiation can be emitted from any surface or particle that was irradiated by the blast. This is probably the kind of radiation most people are familiar with, and it can be dangerous from hundreds of feet or even miles away, although the danger does decrease the further you get from it, and no, it won't turn you into the Incredible Hulk. Then after that, there's alpha and beta particles. The radiation from these don't travel nearly as far as gamma rays, however, they're extremely dangerous, especially if they remain on your skin or enter your body. That could happen if they're breathed in or ingested. And the absolute best way to protect yourself from all the fun different kinds of radiation is one that most of us can't afford, and that's a bunker. Since they're underground, you shouldn't have to worry about the blast, that is, unless the nuke detonates right on top of the shelter. Nothing's going to really be able to save you from that. However, they would do an excellent job protecting you from different kinds of radiation. A few feet of packed soil between you and radioactive material would greatly reduce your exposure. But even if you can't afford a full bunker, there are other things that you can do to protect yourself, especially if you live away from a target area and you would only likely experience fallout. First, a basement could be a viable option for a lot of people. They're underground, and as long as you stay away from exterior edges, they should provide you with a significant amount of protection. Plastic sheeting and duct tape can be used to seal these and other makeshift shelters to prevent radioactive particles from getting inside. Brick buildings are another viable option, especially if they're larger and multi-story. Several years ago, I used to teach in a building where the band hall was surrounded by either brick or cinder block. It would have been a decent option for a fallout shelter because we could have stayed in one of the practice rooms, which was around 20 or 30 feet from an exterior wall and around 15 or 20 feet from the roof. It wouldn't have been perfect by any means, but it would have been a lot better than our house. But at the end of the day, just remember that being out in the open is the absolute worst place to be. So if you get a missile alert on your phone or hear some other kind of warning, get inside somewhere ASAP. While your home or apartment won't give you as much protection as a bunker, even staying inside of it for a few weeks could be beneficial. Taking precautions like the aforementioned plastic sheeting and duct tape, staying away from the outside of the house, or sheltering under a table with books stacked on top of it can further reduce your overall exposure. But of course, once again, if it blows up right over your head, none of that's really going to matter that much. And a good illustration about just being inside to protect yourself from fallout would be the movie The Day After. There was a scene where a girl had been in a basement for around 5 days. She had a mental breakdown. I think it was over her boyfriend and how bad the place started smelling. She ended up running outside, tripped over a dead cow, flailed around in the fallout for a little while, and then ran back into the house. By the end of the movie, she was almost dead, surprise, surprise, and the guy who ran out there to get her lost most of his hair. So, stay inside and find ways to keep yourself occupied other than just staring at the walls. As a general rule, 2 weeks should be enough time for radiation levels to drop significantly, but I'm a bit of an overachiever, and I would try to aim for around 3 weeks. When it comes to food and water, make sure that it's accessible from inside of your home and that it requires no preparation. For example, water used while you're sheltering in place should not be from an outside source, and that definitely includes rainwater harvesting. In the aftermath of a nuclear blast, it's extremely likely that rain will be contaminated by fallout. All water you plan on using should be kept inside of your home in portable water containers that you can access easily. For food, keep things on hand that you don't have to cook. I mentioned this in a recent video over storm preparedness, but it would be even more important in the aftermath of a nuclear strike. While you can crack a window to use a camp stove indoors while a storm is going outside, doing that in an environment that's contaminated by radiation would be very dangerous. It would allow irradiated particles to enter your home, and it could possibly contaminate your food as well, considering it's sitting right there. So instead, plan on eating things like canned fruit, granola bars, and trail mix. Also, keep in mind that all commercially canned foods, including soups and meats, are safe to eat straight out of the can. Then most freeze-dried foods can be eaten at room temperature, but they may need a little more time to reconstitute in the absence of heat. Then, after the threat of radiation has diminished, you can start cooking more outside, or at the very least, crack a window in your house. I've included a full list of food items and other supplies in my Ultimate Stockpile Checklist. It's a very comprehensive resource that has a wide range of items that could help you survive both short-term and long-term disasters. It's free for anyone who signs up for my newsletter, and you can find a link to that in the description below. Then for waste management, there's a very good chance that your porcelain throne will stop flushing, and you don't want to be trapped inside with all that mess. And while you will want to eventually bury all of it, going outside to do that would be extremely dangerous if your area has radioactive contamination. So a bucket toilet could help you solve both of these problems. Just line a bucket with a trash bag, set a toilet seat lid on top of the bucket, and then do your business. The lid can be placed on top of the bucket when it's not in use, and the bag can be tied up and the lid attached after it's full. After that, just move on to a different bucket. Then for hygiene, be sure to have plenty of wet wipes and hand sanitizer. Those will allow you to clean your hands after you use the restroom and before you eat without having to use up your precious water reserves. Next thing that you'll need to survive a nuclear war is personal protective gear. And no, this is not so that you can go outside during the period of time where radiation levels are at their highest and then go make fallout angels on the ground. That's a remarkably bad idea, but eventually you will need to go outside and check things out, and during this time it's a good idea to wear certain things. First, you'll need a good quality CBRN gas mask with filters. CBRN stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, so if your equipment has that rating, it should have you covered in most situations. They'll prevent you from breathing in or ingesting fallout or other radiated particles, and since a gas mask covers your full face, it'll also prevent you from getting that junk in your eyes as well. After that, a radiation suit with gloves and boot covers would be good to have as well, since it'll help keep harmful particles off of your body. However, it's important to remember that masks and suits will not protect you from gamma radiation. It can go right through those, through your body, and then right out the other side. So always limit how long you spend in areas that can be contaminated. Another thing you can do to protect yourself is take potassium iodide tablets. These will fill your thyroid with non-radioactive iodine, preventing it from absorbing radioactive iodine. It's kind of, you can't shove an elephant in a tube sock sort of thing. But when it's time to go outside, you'll also want a way to figure out what's radioactive and how much so. Unfortunately, radiation is invisible, so the best way to determine if your area is safe or not is to use a Geiger counter or dosimeter. As a general rule, a Geiger counter is used to measure radiation levels of a particular location or item in real time. A lot of them don't log cumulative exposure or would need to be hooked up to a computer to access those measurements. A dosimeter, on the other hand, is designed to measure a person's cumulative exposure over time. This is important because how much time you spend being exposed to radiation is many times a lot more important than how radioactive a particular item or area is. Having a Geiger counter or dosimeter will allow you to know if it's safe to come outside, if decontamination efforts have been effective, or also help you judge the amount of time you can spend in a given location. However, one thing to remember about Geiger counters and dosimeters is that they are electronic, meaning they could be affected by an EMP or electromagnetic pulse. This is a major concern since a high-altitude EMP would likely precede nuclear ground strikes on ground targets, and even detonations on or near the ground produce EMPs as well. So because of this, you'll need to protect your Geiger counter inside of a Faraday enclosure. If you have a larger Faraday bag, you could also store a small set of solar panels and a USB battery bank with your Geiger counter or dosimeter to help keep it powered up long term. And although you can keep something like a Geiger counter running with a small portable backup power option, you may want something larger as well. This would allow you to power or charge more devices or run larger or more power-hungry pieces of equipment as necessary. A solar generator is a viable option for this since it won't require you to store large amounts of fuel, but like smaller versions that I mentioned earlier, they, along with any other device that you plan on using with them, should be protected in some sort of Faraday enclosure. You can find large Faraday bags designed specifically for generators, however, those are pretty expensive. A while back I showed how to make a Faraday cage out of a galvanized steel trash can and other common household items. If you put it together correctly, it should provide a decent amount of protection and it'll also hold quite a bit of stuff. But one issue with the solar generator is the potential for nuclear winter. Now, before I get into this, just know that it's theoretical. A lot of people smarter than me have been slap fighting for years as to whether or not a large-scale nuclear winter would happen after a nuclear war. The basic premise is that dust and debris thrown into the air could block out the sun for an extended period of time. While it probably wouldn't be a total blackout, it could block enough sunlight to make using a solar generator difficult, and it would affect other things as well. So if you're really concerned about the possibility of nuclear winter, it may be a good idea to invest in wind-based power options. These aren't as common as solar, but there are some portable and home-based options available, although they're pretty pricey. Then another issue with nuclear winter is that growing seasons will be reduced drastically. And this is on top of having to deal with soil and water sources that have been contaminated by fallout and other radioactive debris. If you have a larger wind power system, you could grow food indoors. An aquaponic system that could grow plants and raise fish would be very useful. You could get energy efficient LED grow lamps and pumps, but on the downside, it would be pretty expensive to set up and it would require a lot of maintenance as well. But at the end of the day, it really may be the best way to have a long term food source after that sort of event. Now, moments ago I mentioned that EMPs are another thing you should be worried about if folks start to get all nuke happy. So, if you want to see preps that you need to survive an EMP, then click here. Or if you want to see a list of things that you should do in the aftermath of an EMP, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.